Welcome back to Plastic Surgery Decoded, the podcast designed to help you better understand plastic surgery. We take the mystery out of it in plain language. You'll find it interesting and useful whether you are already planning a procedure or you're just curious. I'm your host, Dr. Regina Newhan, and we are now into Season 5 of the podcast. After you listen to this episode, know that you can explore and enjoy many other topics, either through your favorite podcast app or through the website at PlasticSurgeryDecoded.com. The first 40 episodes, or Seasons 1, 2, and 3, comprise the Plastic Surgery Decoded Classics, with my singular voice covering cosmetic and reconstructive procedures, skincare, and general questions about plastic surgery. The remainder of episodes, Seasons 4 and 5, are interviews with my colleagues around the country to help you learn about the subject. A great variety to choose from. Remember that this podcast reflects my experience and opinion, as well as those of any guest interviewed. It is not intended to provide medical advice, nor is it a substitute for a formal consultation with your physician. So come along with me as we explore this ever-growing world of plastic surgery. Let's go! I think most of us recognize the importance and value of self-care these days, but that may not always extend to our skin. In fact, skincare is often an afterthought. Yet when we present ourselves to the world, the reality is that facial appearance can have a huge impact upon how initially we may be received. The signs of aging, whether natural or prematurely advanced by sun exposure, diet, stress, smoking, to name a few, may detract from our confidence in that department. And the qualities of our skin, like texture, tone, and evenness of pigmentation, are really the first things on display. So it makes sense to give our skin the care it needs on a daily basis. But what does it mean to do or have good skincare? What should you really be using, and how long should you have to use it? Should your skincare be flexible seasonally, especially in climates that vary in extremes? These questions and more are answered by my guest today, Dr. Amir Karam, who has spent a great deal of time researching this topic and coming up with best practices. Listen in as he shares his thoughts and opens us up to his insightful point of view. Here we go. Well, I'd like to welcome to our conversation Dr. Amir Karam. Now, he is a board-certified facial plastic surgeon in San Diego. Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Could you just explain to the listeners the type of practice you have? What kind of patients do you see? What kind of cases do you do?
Yeah, so, I've been in practice for almost 20 years now, and really the practice has evolved a lot. In the beginning, I was doing a lot of facial rejuvenation as well as rhinoplasty, and then some injectables and things like that. Probably in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, it's become more and more, and to this point, exclusively facial rejuvenation procedures. From a surgical point of view, it's literally all week long of facial rejuvenation surgery.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's one way to give your patients excellent quality, is to do it and do it and do it. Well, we're actually here to talk about how a person should care for their facial skin, and, how recommendations sometimes differ based on the time of year. But before we get into that, could you just remind the listeners the importance of skincare in general? What do you tell your patients about that? What do you tell your patients who wonder if it's even too late to start a skincare regimen?
Yeah, that's all really important information and great question. So for me, ever since the beginning, I put a very significant amount of weight on the quality of the skin, because my perception of what people really want ultimately is they want to look as young as they feel. That's like the whole reason why they come to surgeons, right? And use the aesthetic industry in general, is because there's a growing gap between how they perceive themselves versus the way they actually look. And as age, widens that gap. But what creates that discrepancy between those two is basically the changes that are happening to the skin, as well as the changes that are happening to the shape of the face. So surgeons create or restore the shape of the face by facelifts and eyelid surgeries and those type of things. But if the skin is still aged looking, then the total picture does not quite look like a younger version of themselves.
Right.
And so I've always seen the skin and shape as basically two sides of the same coin. So I've always literally made a significant amount of educational priority as well as therapeutic priority to try to help my patients achieve a more youthful looking skin, whether or not they're having surgery with me or not. And I would say that feeling or that prioritization has only grown over time, because as you start to see more and more people looking like when they preoperatively they have very youthful looking skin, let's just say they have been taking care of their skin for decades, and then they have a surgery, and then all of a sudden you're looking at them and no matter what age they are chronologically, they actually look like a young person. Versus when you see somebody who's got sun-weathered, skin, lines and wrinkles, discolorations, thinning, crepiness, all these other things, and then you do a facelift, for example, they look better, they look tighter, but they don't look young.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And whether they started that regimen ahead of time or they start to do it after surgery, the beautiful thing about skin is that it literally is never too late. The greatest analogy, or the closest analogy, is the way your body looks, your fat composition, your muscle composition. Those can all be improved at any state of life by doing the right things day in and day out. And the skin is the same way. It's like, whether you've taken care of your skin in your up until your 50s or 60s, once you start, you'll start to see improvements happening. They're not immediate. Nothing is a magic bullet and creates overnight change.
Alas.
Yeah, but doing the right things over time, you're going to see improvements, and it's always worth starting that process at any point once you recognize that it's available to you.
That's excellent information for the listeners. And let's go a little further. What is photoaging? What are the effects that the sun has on our skin?
So the sun, is specifically UVA light, the sun is composed of UVA and UVB primarily, but UVB is responsible for the burning as well as skin cancers and things like that. But UVA light is very directly related to the process where collagen, which is what the skin is composed of, basically begins to accelerate its breakdown. It breaks down naturally with age, the production of it decreases with age, but the sun accelerates that process. And so people who've had a lot of exposure to sunlight over time just see an accelerated aspect of skin aging, which we call photoaging. So fine lines and wrinkles, discolorations, brown spots, and even red spots, broken capillaries. But the quality and the structure of the skin all begin to break down at a little bit more of an accelerated pace because of the sun exposure.
So we're getting structural changes in the skin, losing some of that elasticity and resilience from collagen and, say, elastin. But we're also seeing changes in the texture of the skin and maybe even pigment changes too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just all around, all the different factors. I mean, dryness, all these different aspects are related to sun exposure. So it is probably one of the most foundational things that one can do if they're serious about keeping their skin in good shape or beginning a process to improve their skin, is to limit the amount of sun exposure, either through the use of sunscreens, or just physical blockage, or going out in certain times of the day. But minimizing the amount of sun exposure is an important starting point, because otherwise it's like, whatever changes you go get a laser done, etc., and then you go back out in full-blown sun. It doesn't take long before the benefits of that laser, for example, start to become unrealized. And same thing with skincare.
Right.
So I consider sun protection and sun avoidance an important part of keeping your skin looking young.
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to tell my patients that sunscreen was probably the best and easiest,
Yeah,
skincare product they could use.
absolutely.
And then there are a plethora of things on top of that, but that's a basic. If we move away from photoaging, what about other environmental factors or habits or things like that might contribute to aging of the skin?
I mean, there's a lot of environmental factors that play a role in skin aging, but I think smoking is a massive, massive contributor, probably as important as sun, when it comes to an accelerated ager of skin. And it's interesting because, on one hand, in the U.S., probably smoking has decreased to some degree, but vaping has increased. So there's this aspect of it. But I think bottom line is that is a very, very important component. Again, kind of like a non-starter. People who smoke and people who get a lot of sun are getting a double whammy on top of that. But beyond those things, I mean, Your diet plays a huge role, right? I mean, if you think
Sure.
about skin, I mean, if you really just want to keep it very simple in your head, you think about skin, it's an organ. It's the body's largest organ. It protects us from the environment penetrating into our insides. So it has a real function, obviously, and as a part of us, everything that we eat, everything that we expose ourselves to, alcohol, hydration,
Yes, alcohol.
sleep, diet, all these different things contribute to the health of all the organs in our body, including our skin.
Hmm.
So they all have a direct impact in that aspect. The reality, though, is, for example, if you have a couple of bad nights of sleep, you're going to wake up and your skin's going to look rough. Like you're not going to look as good as you normally would. Hydration, same thing. But the structural changes, the changes in collagen and elastin and all those type of things, those are being contributed more from a genetic point of view, as well as the big two factors, the UVA light, as well as smoking aspects.
Yes.
But as estrogen, for example, in women continues to decrease as we age, the direct relationship with collagen production seems to be tied hand in hand.
Absolutely.
So there's these things that you have no control over, and then there's all these other things that you have some control over. So what you want to really focus on is improving the things you have control over, and then bypassing through some of the treatments and things like that that you can do to improve the biological changes that you have no control over.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable and healthy way to approach it. And again, we're here to talk about different recommendations based on seasons. However, let's talk about what the basics are of good skincare. It's certainly individual, but there are some just general themes. What categories of products do you think are beneficial?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot, and one that I feel very comfortable answering from a science and a logical point of view. So we said that there's a number of things that are happening to skin as it ages. And the way I look at it is the structural things that we talked about, the collagen and elastin loss that degrades and decreases over time. So that thins the skin, weakens the skin, and makes the skin have fine lines and wrinkles, etc. Then there's another aspect with aging, which is dryness. Moisture levels of the skin decrease. It becomes more dry as time goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the pigmentation aspects, right? There's the changes in pigment. And then there's the contribution or the changes according to pore size. As the oil balance shifts and the structure of the skin changes,
Sure.
some of these pores end up getting clogged up because the epidermis, which is the top layer of the skin, does not get turned over the way it does when it's younger. And once the pore gets blocked, the pore dilates as the oil is
Yes.
unable to be completely secreted from the ducts. So skin aging is very multifaceted. And the way I've approached it throughout my career, and as well as some of my recent endeavors with developing skincare, is that basically I look at it as every single one of those aspects have to be addressed head on. So when it comes to collagen and elastin, you want to basically increase the production at the cellular level. And those are,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, priority products like or ingredients like retinol, vitamin C, niacinamide, and peptides.
Mm-hmm.
Those are components that have very direct effect on the DNA level to improve or increase the production of some of these important structural proteins in the skin. And then there's the aspect of pigmentation. So you want to do things that are going to decrease the production of pigmentation. So in that category, some of these are multitasking, like retinols decrease pigment as well as vitamin C. Niacinamide has a role in that. But then there's a whole host of botanical ingredients like daisy flower, like licorice root. Like there's a number of these different things that also have
Kind of herbal
a
things.
role, herbal botanicals that have a direct role in the pathways that produce pigment. So if you decrease the production of pigment, well, what ends up happening is you produce less, your skin gets less pigmented, but then as the natural breakdown of some of these pigments happen at the surface level, there's not new ones coming up to create. So if, let's say hypothetically, you end up getting a laser and you shut down your pigment production, you remove all the surface pigment and you've decreased the production, well then you're going to get a much longer lasting result because you're not adding more pigment to the skin because of the shutdown. And then when it comes to like pores, for example, sounds counterintuitive, but the addition of oil to the skin decreases the intrinsic production of oil at the glandular level, because it's like any other feedback loop. If it already has some extrinsic or external source of oil coming to the skin, that puts a little bit less demand on the skin to produce.
Right.
So
right.
as a result, you decrease the oil production, therefore the pores get less likely to get clogged. But if you keep the surface exfoliated, you're gonna, and again, retinol is another one that has a high cellular turnover and has even a little bit of exfoliating properties to it, removing some of those dead layers at the top of the skin, allowing the skin to basically effectively breathe better. You see pores improve over time. And I think one of the most simple ways to improve hydration is through hyaluronic acid. So hyaluronic acid, it functions like a sponge. It attracts a lot of water to the skin, and then immediately you see a supple, more hydrated looking skin. And in summary, it's like the big ones that I think about is retinol, vitamin C, niacinamide, and certain peptides, hyaluronic acid, lipids, and then botanical lighteners. Those to me kind of address all aspects of the fundamental things that are happening to the skin as one ages.
Yeah, and that's what we're after, the fundamentals. Do you find that there are different needs in male skin versus female skin? Or certainly is there different compliance level of skincare?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because I definitely think there's a difference in compliance level as well as willingness to do a lot of things. So for example, everything I just mentioned normally would take a number of steps, right? Each one of these typically are like an individual product, and back probably for 10, 15 years, I would watch my wife do these steps, all the steps that I just mentioned. She would do them, and it would take her 15 minutes at night. She'd line up all of her bottles and do all this kind of stuff. Obviously, I knew what should be done, but there was no way I didn't have the motivation and willingness to spend that much time on my skin. So
Got it.
men, I think, have generally speaking, probably a more challenging time to be compliant with multi-step routines. And also, if there's less education on the male side oftentimes. So, but the actual needs of the skin are exactly the same. There's really no difference,
Got it.
other than the fact that there is this, very predictable change in collagen production based on estrogen levels, that we can make those. But men are losing collagen as well. They're just doing it in their own timeline, as opposed to in a more kind of like defined or correlated process. But yeah, for me, I mean, I've only become able to do skincare literally since I developed my own, that was like just a few steps as opposed to all those components. But I always felt guilty not doing it, but I do exactly what my wife does, for example, now.
Yeah.
We're on the same regimen. So I don't think there's a difference between me.
A team approach.
Yeah, it keeps
great.
it easy.
Well, I would love to just kind of break it down a little bit and talk about individual categories of products and just have some questions about those, if that's good with you.
Yeah.
Let's start with just a basic cleanser. Does it matter if it's like a deep cleaning foam or a gentle non-foaming cleanser, or what do you usually recommend to people?
So it's interesting, because I think people have a perception that foaming equals clean, and cleaning.
I think they do.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that as I studied this and really try to understand the differences in cleansing, I recognize that it's probably one of the most important steps in the process of setting your skin up for success with everything that you're going to apply later. And foaming cleanser, generally speaking, and I can't speak for every foaming cleanser out there, but just as a category, foaming generally equals microabrasion and dryness in many cases. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, without getting into details of every single one and what's in one versus the other, what's making it foaming, etc., the ideal is to use a non-foaming gentle cleanser that doesn't dry the skin, that doesn't create any type of like microabrasions, but also creates a situation where their skin is reducing the inflammatory state post-use, so that when the products that you're going to eventually use have the best opportunity to penetrate in a calm skin surface, as opposed to one that's been a little bit irritated or inflamed or injured through the cleansing process. So for example, it's cleansers that have micro bamboo shoots in them, for example, tiny, they're more abrasive type of cleansers. Well, to me, that's more exfoliation, in the category of exfoliation.
Yeah.
But to use that as your daily cleanser, that's probably too much for your skin in terms of keeping the surface kind of healthy and relaxed and soothed. So
Agreed.
I wouldn't recommend. But as a daily cleanser, I think non-foaming is generally speaking the way to go. And it takes a little bit to get used to because without the suds in the foam,
Yeah, we're trained to.
exactly. So that's my recommendation on a cleanser.
That's great information. Let's next talk about a moisturizer. Just briefly, you touched on this a little bit, but does absolutely everyone need a moisturizer? And again, what if someone has a tendency for so-called oily skin? Again, we talked about this, but it seems counterintuitive to use moisturizer. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think it goes against intuition that if you have oily skin that you're going to use something that is either moisturizing or has oil or any of that. But kind of what I was saying earlier, that the state that you want to get to is like an equilibrium. You want a state where the skin has the right level of moisture and the right level of oil. And the thing is, when people have dry skin, for example, and they don't use some type of lipid or some type of moisturizer, what ends up happening oftentimes is it creates a situation where your skin is trying to increase the amount of oil production to counter hydration of the skin, which is not always necessarily the same thing. Hydration and oiliness are not exactly the same problem. It's not the same issue.
Yeah.
And as collagen and all these other things that I mentioned decrease with time, so does hyaluronic acid production within the skin. So adding external sources of hyaluronic acid that can actually penetrate into the skin can help with the hydration component. And whether you have oily or non-oily skin, the use of lipids on that skin will help you reach an equilibrium where if you have oily skin, you produce less oil, and if you don't have enough oil, then you're going to get it from your external source. So it really does help create that nice equilibrium where it gets to the right level by adding certain types of product to it.
I think that's a great insight for people, and just the understanding that you're not necessarily compounding the problem
Exactly.
by utilizing a moisturizer on a daily basis.
Yeah. Like my skin was historically very oily, I would say, and now that I actually use like a lipid for moisturizer, my skin has gotten a lot less oily, which is, again, yeah, counterintuitive, but it makes sense scientifically.
Isn't that amazing? What about the category of what we call antioxidants? What are they? What do they do? And maybe some examples of those.
Yeah, I mean, the antioxidants, I think throughout our entire body, have important roles. The cells are constantly creating free radicals. The sun is creating free radicals, et cetera. And by diminishing or soaking up some of those radicals, it creates an environment where there's less damage to the skin or any other organ part. So the big ones, for example, vitamin C is a huge one. It's
Yes.
creates a situation where it really is a strong antioxidant. And I think just an all-around tissue health, antioxidants are an important part of that solution. There's botanical antioxidants, there's vitamin C, there's synthetics that can be used, but at the end of the day, having some aspect of antioxidant in your regimen definitely is a healthy way to address that either environmental production of free radicals or just natural cellular production that happens no matter what we do.
Mm. In vitamin C in particular, does it matter how that product is stored or kept? In other words, degradation that can happen?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, there's a lot of great categories of product, like vitamin C being one of them. But if vitamin C, for example, is not stored in the right way, it basically becomes degraded or compromised. So some of the things that can affect vitamin C is sunlight, for example. So if you notice, a lot of vitamin C's in general that you purchase are going to be purchased either in a serum container, but that it's amber colored. It's a dark color.
Not clear.
Not clear glass. And if it is, you should be concerned about it, because generally speaking, vitamin C is going to be broken down by direct sunlight. So keeping it in a dark container or keeping it away from the sun is an important aspect. But air, even just the exposure to air can have a direct effect on the stability of the vitamin C. What was interesting is when we had our vitamin C, we first had it in a black glass dropper container, like the way you see in most cases. And then since then, we switched it to an airless pump. So it's completely zero exposure to sun, but also zero exposure to air. because every
That's
time you're
great.
opening the container, taking it in and out, all that air exposure is potentially degrading the
Breaking down. Oh my gosh.
exactly, yeah. So the storage is very important when it comes to products. The same thing for retinols and things like that. They have a lot of the same issues associated with it.
Yeah. Well, let's head over to retinols and what we call cell turnover agents. What do they do, and what time of day should we use them?
Yeah. So when I think of retinol, I think of it as almost like a stimulator or like fertilizer. I think of it in that capacity. So cell turnover is the notion or the concept of a cell dying and then being replaced. That's the life cycle of a cell. And
Yeah.
so there's a contribution that retinols and retin A, which is basically a class of skincare, but probably one of the more direct impacts that it has is that stimulation impact that it has on the production of collagen at the DNA. When the retinol molecule gets absorbed into the skin, it then gets absorbed into the cell and then gets taken up and has a direct effect on the expression of collagen production at the DNA level. So this is sort of molecular biology 101, but this is what you want to
Love it.
yeah, this is what you want to see happen is you want to see that your cell is actually producing something in response to this quote unquote medicine that you're giving it. And that aspect is so important, and why it's so important for people to understand that aspect of it is because if you're not giving your cells that stimulant consistently over time, well, what's going to happen is either you're not going to get the most out of that expression, the production of collagen, but then the minute you stop it, that expression begins to decrease back down to baseline, back to where it was. So, for example, retinols is one of those products where for 20-something years that I've been helping people get on them, I've had the hardest time keeping people actually on them because a lot of times the skin will respond by redness and some flakiness and some irritation. And so as a result, people back away from it and then maybe they use it once a week or twice a week or something like, in that range because they figure that's better than nothing, but they can't do it every day. The ideal is actually to do it every day, but a lot of times you have to get through that acclimation phase for most retinols. But also, if you're doing it infrequently or pausing too often, then your skin is just sort of starting and stopping its progression, its anti-aging progression. So if something like that, you use a very low level of retinol that you can tolerate, it's better to use it every day than it is to basically use it infrequently or shut it off completely because of that aspect.
Great point. And is it best to use it at night because of this irritation and staying out of the sun, or what do you think?
Traditionally, that's the recommendation for retinols is to be used at nighttime because of sun sensitivity as well as some of these other aspects that we mentioned. I think it depends on the retinol as well. There's some new generation retinols, for example, the one that we use in our product Illuminate, which is actually, it's like a slow release retinol. So we actually use it twice a day, morning and evening, and because of its slow release, it's not getting into the skin all at once. Therefore, it's not giving the sensitivity that a lot of people see. And also, it's a lighter dose of it in combination with being split, between morning and night. That helps the tolerance of it go up. So I think there's a lot of ways to approach it. But for sure, I would say, in my opinion, I've always believed this, that retinol is one of the most foundational anti-aging ingredients just because, it works at the DNA level. It does things related to pigment. It helps with cell turnover. It also it has a little bit of a micro-peeling effect. So it's like you're getting 4 or 5 different tasks that are directly opposing aging all in one ingredient. So I consider it a very important, powerful component of any anti-aging skincare routine.
It is a little powerhouse. That's great. And I would love it if we could debunk the topical collagen products, or what do you tell patients about that? They get over the counter or whatever.
The big sort of take home with all of those things is penetration of the skin, right?
Great point.
So skin is designed to prevent things from entering, right? I mean, that's the whole point, is the skin barrier's function is to keep us safe from the outside world. So viruses and bacteria and pollutants and chemicals and things like that can't penetrate through and get into us. So based on that, if you want to think of it a very simple way, is either the chemical composition or the size has to be a certain way that keeps a molecule on the outside or on the inside. Topical collagen is a large molecule, and there's no way for it to penetrate into the skin and then get assimilated into the structure of the skin. So it really, to me, the use of topical collagen or anything that is structural in that way, if it can't get into the skin, it's useless. What you want to do is you want to build collagen. You want to create collagen and then lay it into the where it belongs. And that's where some of these other products that we just talked about, these ingredients, actually work. But yeah, I'm with you. I think topical collagen would make no sense. What is interesting, and it still makes zero sense based on what we know about absorption of proteins, for example, the ingestion of collagen, oral ingestion of collagen. I remember in undergrad physiology and medical school reiterating this, is that, you consume a protein. In the intestines, the protein gets broken down into amino acids. So basically, it breaks a whole structure into its building blocks. And then it gets absorbed into the bloodstream, which then can be used for assimilating other proteins throughout the body.
Right.
But there's this very limited, and I honestly can't speak to how quality the studies are. But there's some empiric, meaning, a person's own perception, as well as some small studies that show that taking some of these hydrolyzed collagen powders seems to have an effect on hydration of the skin and fine lines and wrinkles, etc. Makes no sense from what we know about how proteins work. I don't know if it's just a matter of, having enough of those building blocks around, because when you're taking a collagen product, whether it's in bone broth or whether it's a powder, there's specific types of amino acids that the skin really needs to build collagen. 3 or 4 of them specifically that are really important. And those, if you have enough of those or surplus of those, then maybe the skin, when it's taking its turn throughout the body, can have enough of those amino acids to help build it. That's just a hypothesis or theory that may have zero impact or not. But so when people ask me, should I take it or should I not, I would definitely tell them, the oral versions, it's one of those things that's not going to do you any harm except for your bank account, right? I mean,
Right.
It's not going to hurt you. And as long as it's not replacing all these other things that we're talking about, foundational ones like the retinols and vitamin C, you want to take it. At the very least, you're getting a little bit of extra protein to your diet maybe, But I certainly wouldn't say this is the way you're going to get your skin to look young, is by using oral collagen. And definitely topical, I would say, makes no sense at all.
Yeah. All right. Great information. Well, we touched on pigment a little bit, but generally speaking, are there differences in skincare recommendations for lighter skin versus skin of color? What do you tell your various patients?
As far as skincare recommendations, I do not see any difference in the needs of the skin of somebody with lighter or darker skin, at all. I mean, all these things that we just talked about are fundamental parts of everyone.
Yeah.
So, and they all need to be addressed. I think at the end of the day, any type of skin, they're going to see some pigmentation, I have darker skin and, I'm from Southern California, San Diego area, and I spent my entire childhood out in the sun and enjoying the sun. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older, late 40s, et cetera, that pigment started to really show up in my skin. And, maybe if I had lighter skin, it might have happened a little bit sooner, than that or whatever, but it still affects.
And you mean like irregular pigmentation, kind of like?
Yeah, irregular, dark pigmentations, sunspots basically.
Yeah.
So I think it affects everyone of all ethnicities, skin types, et cetera. So the needs from a pigmentation reduction point of view, especially for somebody who's seen a lot of sun, is going to be equal.
Gotcha. Well, you've given the listeners a really great overview of basic skincare needs. I'd like to turn direction a little bit and talk about how those skincare needs might change seasonally. What modifications you might recommend. Let's say warmer months versus colder months. Do we need more frequent moisturizer in the summer, but is the air drier in the winter? Or what would you tell them about antioxidants, et cetera? Are there differences in the seasons?
Yeah, I think I live in one of the most, my climate doesn't change much from it's almost the same. But I have patients and we have a lot of customers through our skincare that reach out to us that describe the changes in their, and even when I visit, for example, I go up to the mountains in the winter, totally different climate and effects on your skin.
Well, let me tell you that I'm in the Midwest right now, and we're currently snowed in. So
it's
big changes in the
big
seasons.
Big changes. So I think what I would say for the winter months or any type of dry even in the summer if it's dry climate, biggest thing that happens is moisture loss in the skin, because the skin goes through what's called transepidermal water loss just naturally. It happens. It's one of the things that makes humans kind of unique, is that we can transpire our skin moisture for regulation of temperature, etc. But what ends up happening is if you're losing water through your skin, that means your skin is oftentimes looking a bit more dry through that process. So in the drier, whether hot or cold, one of the things that can be very useful, in addition to obviously all the basics like extra moisturizer and things like that, one of the things is actually sealing your skin like with a barrier that prevents the water loss, especially overnight, because that's like an 8-hour, 9-hour period of time.
Great idea.
And there's a concept called slugging that was popularized in South Korea, where you're applying some type of ointment on your skin, basically a barrier, and that barrier,
kind of a thicker consistency.
Yeah, thicker consistency, like an Aquaphor, Vaseline, or some type of thing like that, that is basically keeping the skin sealed and locked. It's like putting cellophane, keeping the moisture from being able to exit. And what people experience with that is that they wake up in the mornings and their skin is more dewy and more hydrated and more supple looking, because they didn't go through 8 or 9 hours or 10 hours of water loss over the night. So that's a really useful thing. We developed a lot of times people have issue with the emollient consistency of some of those products. We developed something that's like a breathable balm that functions in the same sort of way. People love that concept of sealing and moisture, and that's not something you have to do in the drier or the winter months or the summer months that are dry in certain environments, but you can do that anytime, because that's something that's happening on a regular basis no matter what. It just seems to be accelerated in the drier environments.
Yeah. Are there different recommendations for people who have hypersensitive skin or rosacea or eczema?
Yeah, I think skin sensitivity is a real thing for a lot of people, and change over a lifetime too. I mean, at different points in life you might be more sensitive than you were at other points, and oftentimes the sensitivity of the skin keeps people from being able to apply skincare or do certain things. So it's a real thing. I mean, the bottom line though is, in those situations oftentimes you have to experiment with products. I always tell people that not all products, like people make generalizations, all retinols or all vitamin C's, my skin can't tolerate it, or this or that. And sometimes it's just the individual product or the strength of the product, etc. So making certain modifications in certain formulations, it's worth the effort to observe and see which one works for them. Again, that's something that I think is very real, but it's also shouldn't be a contraindication to using proper skincare. You just have to find the right one.
Yeah, that makes great sense. Well, now, and we've alluded to this, but you actually have your own proprietary line of skincare products. Could you tell the listeners the name of that line and also explain why you decided to start it?
Yeah, so the line is called Karam MD, and the concept actually was, as I mentioned, the more you study the skin, you realize that if you really want to get after it, you got to do it the right way, right? And all the things that we talked about in the early parts of the podcast are the things that I believe are necessary for everyone to be on, for all the different reasons we discussed. But the challenge has always been, for all my patients for years, was I would sit down with them after surgery. 3 months out after surgery, we'd schedule like a 30 to 60 minute basically skincare education meeting.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, it's
a great policy.
It was a great policy, but and potentially very rewarding if people could actually stick with the regimen. So there's a couple of challenges that I was having. One was, and we were using all the big, medical grade lines like ZO and Obagi, Skin Medica. And the challenge was, number one, no matter what, it would end up being between 6 to 10 products.
It's a lot.
If we're going to nail all these different categories. And then the thing was, within each category, within each retinol type, within each vitamin C, there was like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 different choices. Again, because of skin type, male, female, dryness, oily skin, all that. And depending on who in the office would give that education, you could end up with a completely different combination of things.
Good point.
It really never made sense. How can we not have consensus on even, any of it? So if I'm confused as the surgeon, if my staff is kind of being arbitrary about picking these different things, even though they think they're being very deliberate, but if somebody else took the same patient and put them on a regimen, they would give them a different combination. And we're all working under one roof. There was a lot of confusion in general in the industry. So, and my patients were having that in addition to the lack of compliance with being on a 6 to 10 step regimen. So I would put them on these big regimens. Everyone would be super grateful, happy, we're happy, everyone's, we think we're doing the right thing. And then I would see them at their 6 month follow-up, and 80% of them had dropped off the process,
yeah.
right?
Frustrating.
Very frustrating. And so basically at one point I just decided, you know what? Why don't I just put all these things that I'm talking about, put them into a single bottle, basically make it really easy for people to do.
Yes.
And that turned out to be a lot harder of an endeavor than what we envisioned, because formulaically, putting
not everything plays together.
Yeah, plays together. Retinol, vitamin C, niacinamide, peptides, blah, 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 all these different components. They don't necessarily naturally live together based on pHs and stuff. So it was about a 3 or 4 year formulation process that
wow.
that I was working with chemists and labs and things like that to help us figure this out. And then finally we did. And one of the biggest criteria was that, as you mentioned, the sensitive skin situation, because it's surprising how many people have sensitivities to these actives. A lot of times people aren't able to. So I really wanted it to be tolerable with any skin type, any situation, including the most sensitive. So each version that went down, we tested it on sensitive skin patients, and then finally came up with one that was like tolerated by like 98% of the users. And so I knew that if you're on all these important actives, retinol and all that stuff, your skin's going to see changes. But I think what we didn't realize was the impact of being consistent with it and having these products actually belong together. The improvements of the skin have been much greater than what I anticipated or envisioned. And this was 3 years ago when we launched it. And the whole premise is basically 3 steps, the gentle cleanser, the vitamin C, and then this other, which the vitamin C is called Quench, and then the Illuminate, which is a kind of that original vision, has all the major actives in there.
Nice.
You do those 3 steps twice a day, and then you just do that day in and day out, and you forget about everything else.
It's a lot easier than 6 to 10.
So easy. I mean, that's really what got me to be able to actually do it. But that consistency is what gives the changes that you want to see. Because as we talked about earlier, if somebody starts and stops,
Yeah.
they're not going to see change. And then you get discouraged. So what do? You go try to find something else. You try to find something else. And that becomes kind of like, you're just losing ground the whole time because you're aging through all of that. And so, yeah, very excited about it. And the whole thing is called the trifecta.
I love it. It's a great name. Well, what are your thoughts on skincare in the future? What do you think is on the horizon? Either something that is, in near grasp, or something aspirational you would love to see that we're just not quite there yet?
Well, it's interesting. I actually get this question a lot, and this is how I honestly feel. I really don't see that much of a need to create something, because if you think about what we talked about from a molecular basis, right? I mean, that would be what I would want to see. But we already have that. We have like 3 or 4 ingredients that are working at the molecular basis, and they've been around for 40 plus years, and they
tried and true.
Tried and true. They've been on it forever, and they see all these things. So as long as you're using those ingredients, you're going to see changes in your skin. And I mean, like, you have beautiful skin.
Thank you.
I'm sure you take great care of your skin. Any patient I've ever seen in my own practice that is taking great care of their skin, they have basically, you can't distinguish their skin from like a 20 or 30-year-old skin. So I think the pieces are here, and they've been here for a long time. The challenge, I think, is the compliance for a lot of people and the awareness of what they need to actually do. So I don't, you think about it, like other components in the growth factors, more peptides, but they're all doing exactly the same conceptual thing that your retinols and vitamin C and niacinamide and peptides are currently doing. So I don't have like this wish list of something that would be somehow better than what we have now. Maybe that it would work faster, I don't know. But otherwise, I mean, people do see changes pretty quickly. I mean, a few months in, you're going to see changes. So that seems pretty quick to me, and you got to stay on it. What about you? Do you have any?
Well, I think your points are wonderful here. First of all, having the confidence in the products you're using, and how do you gain that? You gain that through your physician, through your provider, and then having the wherewithal, the consistency, the stick-to-itness, if you will. Those two things together, I think, are wonderful. And that leads me to just ask you your quick opinion about the over-the-counter products that people run out and buy. Again, as you say, they're trying this, it doesn't, they use it for a short time, it doesn't work, they try this, et cetera, versus what they can get through a physician's office, whether it's a proprietary line or just the nicer, high-end, well-researched products that you can get through a physician's office. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, I don't want to confuse our viewers anymore, but what's fascinating, I mean, again, when I was going through this process of development, what I was amazed by is how the majority of lines, whether they're quote unquote proprietary, which in most cases just mean that they're white labeled, or just, you put a physician's label
Put
on
your sticker on it, yeah.
Yeah, you put your sticker on it, and it's the same line that's in every other office that
Gotcha.
that's there, because there's really only like 2 or 3 major labs that are creating product for offices. It's different when you create something from scratch.
Yes.
But
yeah.
the process from scratch, it's a long-term process. I mean, it really is hard to develop. There's no, so I guess my point though is that being in a physician's office by itself doesn't necessarily put the stamp of uniqueness on the particular product. But I think at the end of the day, you have to start with trust, right?
Yeah.
So the trust has to be somewhere, because there is a lot of choices in each one of these ingredient categories between, even within a retinol, like high penetrating, more tolerant version, da 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 da. So there's a lot. So you have to trust where you're getting your information from. And then the second aspect of it is, I think the proof is going to be in the pudding, right? You should expect your skin to show some signs of positive change, at least within 3 months after use. There has to be some changes. I mean, of course, it's going to get better and better month after month after month, but there should be some visual decrease in pigmentation, improvement in fine lines and wrinkles, something that tells you that what you're doing is actually working.
Yeah, some tangible outcome. Yeah.
Some tangible outcome. And then once you have that tangible outcome, then you should be, okay, now I'm going to stick with this and really see that and continue to be critical of the changes and expect them to continue to improve. Without that aspect, it's very hard. And I think some things that are very helpful for people is to expect that the line that they're on to have been clinically tested. I think that's a really important aspect,
Yeah.
and that it shows changes. Yeah, and then the other aspect is the perception of it. Are you seeing changes? And if the changes are being, meeting your expectations, and you're seeing positive stuff happening, then stick with it, and don't just jump around and, just because somebody else tells you there's something better or whatever.
Makes sense. Well, gosh, this has been such a great conversation. I just want to ask you a final question. If there's any lasting thought you'd like to leave the listeners with, whether it's about skincare basics and recommendations, or just, plastic surgery concerns in general, what are your thoughts?
I mean, really, at the end of the day, it comes down to knowledge and empowerment. I think I look at it from the point of view of a consumer, which is basically no different than the point of view of a physician in this profession. We're inundated with everyone claiming one thing or another. Every new device that comes out has like a different, promise associated with it.
So true.
And we, as physicians, on behalf of our patients, have to be very mindful and have a high level of discrimination about what we expose our patients to. But not everyone is. And also, as a patient, you have to also hold yourself accountable in the sense of looking for sources of truth and looking for reliable information. And then when you have educated yourself properly, and not in a passive way where someone just tells you this is the way it is and okay, but you have to really, if it makes sense to you, you get corroborating lines of evidence and corroborating sense of consensus that your decision is good, then you move forward with it and then you stick with it. Mm-hmm. I always think about it from an opportunity cost point of view. Aging sucks. We all in this profession know that we're treating it for emotional reasons and not for a physical change. It's like, and not everyone needs this, right? But the ones who do need it really need it, and it should be taken as seriously as any other medical condition and not looked at as something trivial or light.
Yeah.
And as a consumer, I think you really have to try your best to be critical and find good sources of information and education, and then move forward. And that's really been kind of like my mission, outside of actually operating and things like that, is to help people navigate through all this kind of stuff, because that's where, as a patient, you're going to feel rewarded for your choices that you make and not frustrated or disappointed.
Love that. Wise words. Well, Dr. Amir Karam, thank you so much for spending some time with us today to discuss this topic. I think you left people with some really valuable information that's going to make a difference, so thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You bet.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, that's our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something too. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Please share this podcast with someone else who might be interested. And while you're at it, check out the podcast website for related topics to explore. It's www.PlasticSurgeryDecoded.com. And as always, thank you for listening to Plastic Surgery Decoded.